tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. That Namo tassa in the beginning, that's just means homage to the blessed, noble, perfectly enlightened one. We recite that 3 times, and it's then after that, Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami means I go to Buddha Dhamma Sangha for refuge. The Namo tassa chant comes from when the Buddha achieved the end of suffering while sitting at the foot of the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, about 2,568 years ago or so. And that there's a we call Deva, which means radiant being, or what we call angels or celestial beings. The king of the Devas, the king of the Tavatimsa heaven of the 33, named Sakka, also known as Indra, came down and said homage to the blessed, noble, perfectly enlightened one. So that's that chant that we do all the time, what we call the Namo tassa chant, that actually comes from a angel that was coming down and paying respects to the Buddha, before what we call the enlightenment of, it wasn't the being that we call the Buddha wasn't the Buddha yet. Buddha is a word that we use to refer to a being that's not suffering anymore. So that's a being that is transcended, not just suffering, but happiness and suffering. So that's what Buddha means awakened, the awakened one. So Namo tassa, Namo is like paying homage, tassa, to that person. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Arahato is the one who is far away from anything unskillful or unwholesome. The arahant refers to an awakened being. Samma sambuddhassa means the one who was awakened by himself, so without a teacher. So the Buddha is the teacher that we follow, but we say the Buddha was awakened he didn't follow a teacher, although he was very grateful for his teachers who brought him up to a certain point. His first 2 teachers, Alara Kalama, Udakaramaputa, they were able to teach him up to a certain point, but he saw there was limitations to their teachings as well, and yet he always remained grateful to them. And when he thought about who he should teach, then he thought of his first 2 teachers. He thought, well, I've reached a state which is beyond whatever my first 2 teachers could teach me, and I have a lot of gratitude and appreciation for them, so I would like to then teach them what I've learned. But then, using his psychic powers, his Buddha eye, then he realized his 2 teachers had just passed away. He hadn't yet, he wouldn't get an opportunity to teach them, that they had both passed away and they were both reborn in some super high Brahma realms, and that they were doing all right, so they were going to be okay. And so then he thought, well, who should I, if they've already passed away, who should I teach first? And he thought of his 5 companions who had done ascetic practices with him. We call the Panchayavagya bhikkhus, the first 5 disciples. There was 5 people who were practicing with him before he was the Buddha. So when he was what we call the Bodhisatta, or the more common word that we know is Bodhisattva, the one striving for awakening. So back when he was on the path before he had become the Buddha, then he was practicing with these 5 other ascetics, and that's when the Bodhisatta or the Bodhisattva was undergoing the severest of the severe austerities, what we call the Dukrakirya, or the severe self-torment, the severe austerities, bringing himself to a point of self-deprivation of pain in order to push the mind into a state of awakening. But when he had that insight that actually it's more about balance, it's not a matter of the body, it's a matter of the mind, bringing the mind into balance. It's not a matter of starving the body or torturing the body in any way. It's a matter of bringing the mind into balance. And when he started taking food again, going on the alms round again, collecting alms food from the village, then and nursing himself back to health after reaching a state of starvation to the point where he had almost died, then the other ascetics with him were disgusted that he'd reverted to a life of luxury by taking food and was no longer pursuing the path of what we call self-mortification. And then they still had confidence in that path, so they left him. They left him to his own devices. They went off to do their own thing. And then the Bodhisattva was free to practice on his own. So he had this insight that it wasn't about torturing the body, it was more about bringing things into a state of balance. But those 5 ascetics who were practicing with him were disgusted by that and felt that he wasn't making a good decision, wasn't making a wise decision, so they left him. So then after the awakening, he thought, well, those 5 people, they do have very strong spiritual qualities, spiritual faculties, and they might be able to understand what I've realized, i.e., the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering, there's a cause of suffering, there's the ending of suffering, and there's a path leading to the ending of suffering, or what we think of as the Noble Eightfold Path. So he thought, well, they could probably understand. So after 7 weeks in under and around the vicinity of the Bodhi tree, where the Buddha happened to attain awakening, where he spends 7 weeks in different postures, some weeks sitting under different trees in the area, some weeks, there's 1 week where he's walking, there's 1 week where he's standing, absorbed in the bliss of deliverance, the bliss of the newly awakened mind, and then eventually thinks, after that time he thinks, maybe I should eat something, maybe I should have a meal. He's actually feeding on the bliss of deliverance. The mind is in such a state of ease and well-being and happiness that he didn't actually consider eating and didn't really need to. But I think so. Maybe he actually gets offered some food from 2 merchants, and they offer him the first meal since the Enlightenment, and then he has a meal and then decides, okay, I'm going to head toward where I think those 5 ascetics are dwelling at this time. So then he makes his way on foot over the next 2 months or so. He makes his way to the deer park at Varanasi, now known as at Deer Park at Benares, now known as Varanasi, and finds his former companions, and they see him coming in the distance, and they think, there he is, the ascetic Gautama, who relinquished the austerities and reverted to a life of luxury. And they think, let us not attend to him. Let us not rise up and greet him when he comes. But then as he makes his way, his presence is so majestic, and his face is so bright and radiant that they can't help themselves, and they automatically get up and start looking after him. And one of them washes his feet. Another takes his outer robe and sets it aside. Another one prepares a seat for him, and they ask about how he's doing. And then they eventually end up having confidence that maybe he has attained something that they haven't figured out yet. And so he gives the first teaching, which is called the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, which is the exposition on the middle way, so that there's these 2 paths, the path of sensual pleasure, and there's the path of hedonism, we could say, in the most extreme sense. And there's the path of self-mortification, and having relinquished those two paths, having discovered a middle way to bring things into balance. And that doesn't just mean moderation or a halfway point between these things, but it's a state it's a state of transcendence in terms of a path of incredible purity and virtue, a path of meditation and development of discernment, a path of generosity and kindness, a path of patience, a path of endurance, a path of forgiveness, all these wholesome qualities then that he teaches about. So without going into the whole path or the whole Noble Eightfold Path or talking about the life of the Buddha too much, just wanted to mention that by way of, that was a little bit of a tangent talking about the Namo Tassa chant, and it somehow led me into talking about this. We don't plan our talks. We're supposed to speak extemporaneously in our tradition, so that's where I've meandered to. But I did want to talk a little bit about forgiveness, which is a theme that I've been thinking about, contemplating quite a bit lately. And us monks in the Ajahn Chah lineage, in the Ajahn Chah tradition, we're recommended to talk about what we're contemplating or what we're thinking about, what we're using in our practice, what we're finding useful currently. So I'm finding this contemplation or this recollection of forgiveness has been useful lately, because the Buddha talks about this quality called abhayadana in Pali. So I live at a monastery called Abhayagiri, and this is a branch monastery. Three Jewels is a branch monastery of Abhayagiri. Abhaya means fearless, Giri means mountain, so our monastery is called Fearless Mountain. And then abhayadana, again, abhaya, fearless, and then dana means generosity or giving. So abhayadana is the giving of fearlessness. And then the Buddha teaches how do you give fearlessness to somebody. The way you give fearlessness to somebody is you forgive them, or you make sure you're on good terms with somebody, and then you have a mutual sense of trust, which is also fearlessness. So to give fearlessness, we give forgiveness. And this includes forgiving others, and it includes forgiving ourselves. And some of us may be familiar with what we call metta practice, or the development of loving kindness, that the Buddha teaches. First, we're supposed to have it for ourselves, and then afterwards we're supposed to have it for others, because we can't, it's taught that if we don't first develop kindness towards ourselves, it's hard to develop kindness toward others. So, but I think it's a bit the opposite with forgiveness. It's actually easier to forgive others. We have to start with forgiving others, and then we can forgive ourselves. So, the longer I live as a senior monk, and the more people I meet, and the more people come to the monastery with questions, I find more and more that almost everybody actually has some form of trauma or another, either from childhood or from some point in their life, even to the point that I've actually thought about retranslating the First Noble Truth, the word dukkha, as trauma. Rather, normally dukkha is translated as suffering, but we could even translate it as trauma. So the First Noble Truth would then say, there is trauma, there is a cause of trauma, there is an end of trauma. It's the path leading to the ending of trauma. Whether it's really heavy traumas that may have occurred through horrific abuse in childhood, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and so on, that so many people have experienced, I'm finding as time goes on, or whether it's just the low-level traumas, the daily trauma of just standing in line at the grocery store and the person won't stop talking to the teller, and we're in a hurry and we need to get our groceries and go home or go do something else, or the trauma of the boss yelling at us, or the trauma of just the breakup, or the trauma of the friend who we thought was our friend and then they betray us or do something behind our back which we didn't know about, that harmed us in some way, or the trauma of just the sibling who ran off with the inheritance. These things are incredibly common. These are all actual examples. And so forgiving others can help with the healing of that trauma for ourselves. So we're not forgiving another person because we're condoning their behavior. We don't condone. Forgiveness doesn't mean we condone somebody else's behavior. And forgiveness also, we shouldn't be looking for some logical reason to forgive, because forgiveness, it's not logical. We just forgive. We forgive even though the other person did treat us absolutely unfairly and unjustly and was totally not in the right. And if it's, say, a trauma from childhood, there's nothing we can do about that. But then to the practice, the way it goes is, if we're able to, and the best case scenario is if we're able to recollect, say, the perpetrator of our trauma in childhood and actually imagine them and say, I forgive you, and for anything I may have done to you, may you forgive me as well. You can just imagine them in your mind. They may even not be around anymore, but just that can help us. That sense of forgiveness can help us. Now, for a lot of people, when they bring up perpetrators of trauma in childhood, there's going to be a lot of fear, and the mind might just be clouded by fear, so we're not able to forgive in that moment. So we need to work up to it. So we work up to it by cultivating qualities like equanimity. First, we have to cultivate equanimity, and according to the Buddha's teachings, the way we do that is we reflect on the law of karma. So for ourselves, any actions we do, good or bad, of those actions, we receive the results of those actions. For everybody else, whatever they do, good or bad, they receive the results of those actions. And so that's supposed to help the mind to develop equanimity or equipoise, a sense of evenness. Once the mind has a sense of evenness and equanimity, then we can go into compassion. If we don't have a basis of equanimity and we try to have compassion, then we can get overwhelmed. So it's good to have that basis of equanimity first. So it goes equanimity and then compassion, and we develop compassion for somebody who may have harmed us, the one we're not yet able to forgive. We develop compassion for them because of the acknowledgement that they're suffering due to their own bad actions. And so if we're able to then have compassion for that person and actually look at their suffering, their own trauma, which they were perhaps inflicting on us, then perhaps we can go to forgiveness. So the progression goes equanimity, compassion, forgiveness, that we can work up to it in that way. Then if we're able to do that, we can actually take on the next stage of the practice, which is to forgive ourselves. Sometimes that can be difficult because we may have done something that we feel regret over. We may have harmed somebody else and we can't undo it. We can't do anything about it. And we feel we may have been tormented by this for years, say whether it's we may have done something less than wholesome, or we may have just made a bad decision and we are not able to forgive ourselves. So the next step is to then say, forgive ourselves. And just by the exercise would be to imagine the regret we feel over the action that we wish we hadn't done, and then say, I forgive myself for that there's nothing I can do, and I can make a determination to, one thing that can help with that is that I can make a promise to myself that I'm going to try to not do that again, that unwholesome action that I regretted. And so forgiving ourselves is perhaps a little bit more difficult. If we're able to forgive others and forgive ourselves, we may be able to do that. Or say the origin story of we do an actual forgiveness ceremony. It's one of the most important ceremonies we have in our community. And it's a very short ceremony that we do from time to time, where we will go and actually visit other senior monks. And as a community, we will do this forgiveness ceremony. We'll say, if our community's done, or if we have done anything unskillful or inappropriate that's done any harm, we ask your forgiveness. And then the senior monk will actually respond by saying, I forgive you, and if I've done anything that's unseemly, inappropriate, etc., may you forgive me as well. So then the senior monk will humbly ask your forgiveness as well. The origin story of this comes from a disciple of the Buddha named Venerable Sariputta, the Buddha's foremost disciple in wisdom, where, according to the story, he's already a fully awakened being himself, one of the great disciples of the Buddha. He's an arahant, and another monk has become jealous of him because Sariputta is able to draw close to the Buddha, so another monk has become jealous of him. And I can't recall the exact reason why, but eventually this monk approaches Venerable Sariputta and he punches him. And Venerable Sariputta doesn't react, but the other monk clocks him out of anger, and Venerable Sariputta doesn't react, and the other monk then goes off and eventually feels very, very remorseful about this, goes to the Buddha, and the Buddha says, well, go and ask his pardon. And so he goes and asks forgiveness from Venerable Sariputta, and Venerable Sariputta says, as you were punching me, I was forgiving you, but I do forgive you, and anything I've done that may have caused you to be upset with me, I ask your forgiveness as well. So even though he doesn't really need to ask forgiveness, he didn't do anything wrong, he also asks forgiveness. So there's this, then the other monk feels better afterwards. So it shows that even if we do something we all make mistakes. So if we do something like that, then there is a path out, and the path out is through being able to ask forgiveness, being able to lower ourselves, be very humble and ask forgiveness, and then also to be able to give forgiveness. And there's another place in the teachings where the Buddha says, it's a wise person that asks forgiveness, and it's a wise person that gives forgiveness. So this is, if somebody asks forgiveness, it's important for us to also be able to give it and to ask ourselves, even if we feel maybe we didn't do anything wrong. Maybe there was something that we didn't realize affected a person in a certain way, or there's some sort of misunderstanding, then it's always good to just clear the air, and then we can live together harmoniously, blending like milk and water, as it says in the suttas. So this, if we're not able to forgive, this can create some serious obstacles for us. And I've seen this before and I've also had this for myself, where like holding a grudge against somebody, it produces all sorts of obstacles. It's really impossible to feel at peace in the meditation. And it can even cause physical problems. That sense of holding a grudge can lead to anxiety and stress, which eventually can affect the body physically, and you can actually become ill and have problems with breathing, or worse, you might have some sort of illness that develops over time through not being able to forgive. And then the moment we are able to forgive, what a relief. What a relief. I read a book, Unbroken, by Louis Zamperini. It's a story of forgiveness, and maybe people here have read it, I don't know, but it's a man who was a prisoner of war in World War II. He was held in a Japanese camp and was horribly tortured by his captors for a long time, for years, and miraculously survived, was returned to America, became an alcoholic and wasn't able to forgive, and just went into immense suffering and the incredible trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, but then actually ended up at one point having an insight that he needed to forgive. And this was through Christianity, but it doesn't really matter what religion it was. What matters is the forgiveness is what transformed him. And he has this insight that he needs to forgive all of the torturers who inflicted pain and torture upon him. And when he's able to do this, his whole life turns around, and he stops drinking. And not only that, but he became this incredible positive force in society. And he had this sense that he could do almost anything. for example, he took up skateboarding at the age of 70, and he lived to be 100. He died not too long ago. But it's just through forgiveness. And he was so strong in his forgiveness that he actually wanted to, eventually he got to the point where he wanted to meet his captors in person. He wanted to travel to Japan and actually forgive them in person and also ask forgiveness from them for anything he may have done in the war that everybody was all caught up in. So they weren't able to do that. They didn't want to meet up with him, his captors. He did manage to contact people who knew them, but then he found that they didn't want to meet up with him. They weren't interested in practicing this forgiveness ceremony with him. But that's the level to which it went to. He really wanted to meet up with them, and he actually felt love and compassion for them in a very genuine way. So it has incredible power if we're able to do it, but also to not be too hard on ourselves if we aren't able to do it yet. We have to get there through that equanimity, compassion, and we have to get ourselves there somehow. But it's good to acknowledge the benefits of it. It's really, I think, one of the most important qualities we need to be developing in our practice if we want to make progress on the path of the Buddha, the Noble Eightfold Path. Then I think forgiveness is a big place to start, because anytime we're holding on to some sort of grudge or resentment, that's an obstacle for us. It's not bringing any benefit to us in any way. So eventually we do have to forgive everything. When we forgive everything, then we're free of debts, and the path is clear. The path is clear for us when we're able to do that. I think that's all that's coming up in terms of recollections for the time being. But if anybody has any questions, please. Is everybody able to forgive themselves for everything? Yeah.
In a situation like in Gaza, the Palestinians, how is it possible for them to forgive?
Oh yeah, that's the next part I was going to bring up. I forgot about that. Yeah, we might be able to forgive others and forgive ourselves, but then when we're not involved and we see injustices done between people, then it's hard. That's perhaps the hardest to forgive. That's the hardest to forgive, because it's not logical. It doesn't really make sense to forgive, but it's more about seeing the suffering of not forgiving. And they won't be able to forgive each other, or things we don't see in the news, like the atrocities happening in the Congo, for example, that don't get televised as much as, say, Gaza, which could perhaps even rival it. But how can people forgive each other in that case? But that's why I bring up like Louis Zamperini, who was able to forgive his Japanese captors who tortured him for, I think it was 2 years, in the most horrific ways. Like he almost died many times, and that he was able to forgive them, and then the power of that. So I also read a book, which actually one of the reasons I know about the Congo is I read a book about these earth treasure vases that there's a woman who's a Dhamma practitioner who makes it her whole life to take these blessed earth treasure vases and bury them in war-torn areas of the world and try to create a network of goodness as a prayer for world peace. And she talks about, say, going to war-torn parts of Africa, and that there was, so the power of, it's not just the power of forgiveness, but the power of kindness. So say something like Gaza, that happens because of mutual grudges, mutual revenge. And, each side has done things that would seem unforgivable. And so that's why the fighting keeps happening. And so at a certain point, you just have to, somebody has to say, this has to stop, and it stops through forgiveness. So it stops through kindness. And there was, what was it? I'm going to get this wrong, but in Liberia, not Libya, it was in Liberia. This is probably about 10 years ago. There was a civil war that had been going for 13 years, and so many people had died. I can't remember the numbers, but just so many people had died, and it was really horrific. And there was a general who had been the bodyguard to the leader of that country, and the leader had been assassinated by like a rebel group. So this particular bodyguard had become then the top general to fight these rebels, and there was a gigantic civil war. And this particular general was about to make a big move in the Civil War, where he was going to him and his army were going to kill everybody in a city of 25,000 people. They were going to just go and like massacre everybody. And then what happened was 300 women had some sort of, I don't know how they decided to do this, but as the army was approaching, a line of 300 women approached the army singing lullabies that they knew the general knew from his childhood. They were all singing, 300 women all singing the same lullabies that he knew as a child, and like it completely broke him. And they didn't go into the city. They retreated, and it's very, very moving, very powerful. And that was the beginning of the end of the Civil War. And then the next really cool part of the story is then that general gave up killing, and he disbanded his army, and he started meditating, and he became a student of Thich Nhat Hanh, and he started doing 3-month meditation retreats, and then he became a very strong force for peace in the country. I'm not sure what's happening there now. Maybe they're having another civil war now, but it's that kind of thing for me is like, oh yeah, that's how you really change things. It's not about getting taking out the commander or killing the right people. It's that's how you really change. That's how things really change, is through kindness, which transforms people. So I don't know what the solution for Gaza would be, but yeah, there's no way to know. But we can't do anything directly. It's more just goodwill, good wishes. The name of the book is you've read it, Ajahn Titapanyo?
Yes, Cynthia Jers. Can't remember.
Cynthia Jers. Is it just called
It's not.
Earth Treasure Vase? No, that's not the name of the book.
Yeah.
Something like...
I might remember it a little bit.
Yeah. But yeah, it's not easy. There's a lot of trauma in the world, a lot of suffering. I'm trying to remember the name of that book. For the Love of the World, is that it?
That's another book.
That's a different book. Okay.
I was thinking in love with the earth, but I don't think that's it.
Oh, yeah. Maybe that is. Yeah, look it up.
When we think about these things, what's happening in the world, it's really hard to make sense of it. But in my world, I try to go down to the bottom of why things are happening like that. Why such unspeakable atrocities all the time. It's a giant. I just come up with this thing. It's like, okay, if I'm in the middle of it, it doesn't seem like a movie. Because my body is involved, but in my mind, it's just a movie. And it's a horrific movie, but whatever, people who are experiencing it through their body, they are completely involved, dramatically involved. And they become these actors, basically, that they don't know that they are actors. They have no clue on that. And, they might have to just go through all that experience to eventually learn, maybe through many lifetimes, learn the lesson what they have to learn in this life. It's what do we have to learn in this life that we born into this body to do that, right? That's how it makes sense to me. And sometimes it is terrible and horrible and incredibly unbearable. It could be to all the pains and traumas and sufferings and almost dying and then coming back and making final sense out of it. These things have to come to that intensity in order to learn. Perhaps that is the sense of it. Which is basically it's a grand karmic theater or a movie. But it's still not real. Not real in the ultimate sense. It seems real. It feels real.
Yeah, I think a lot of people want to be able to help somehow, end conflict in the world, and they also there's a tendency to want to place blame somewhere. So, like, to find out, why is this happening? Who's the main perpetrators, and so on. And in our Buddhist circles, we would say, like, oh, well, we can't do anything directly. We aren't associated with, we aren't in a position to say help directly. And really, there's no one to blame, because it's really the defilements, the mental defilements are what to blame. Greed, hatred, delusion. And we have those as well. So the way we can help is by trying to lessen our own greed, hatred, delusion. And if we're able to do that, then perhaps we can make a difference. But then we don't have enough power currently to directly make a difference in, say, a war-torn country or war-torn situation. But you have somebody like the Buddha who could make a difference in ways like that. We need real, some real power in our practice, and then we might be able to change the heart of at least a few people. It was like the Angulimala, who had killed 999 people, and then he's on the way to kill his own mother, and he was like ransacking the countryside, and the Buddha intervenes and is able to, just through a few words, just to help Angulimala to see the error of his ways, and he drops his weapons and becomes a great disciple of the Buddha. He becomes a monk and a very peaceful being. But it's kind of an interesting story, because he's on the way to kill his own mother, and he sees the Buddha and then decides he's going to try to kill the Buddha. So the Buddha then is just mindfully walking in a way that Angulimala's chasing him, and but even running as fast as he can't catch the Buddha, who just seems to be walking slowly and mindfully. And he says, "Stop, stop. Why won't you stop?" And then the Buddha turns around and says, I have stopped. When are you going to stop? And then he just like is completely blown away and drops his weapons and bows before the Buddha and asks for ordination. So somebody with great power like the Buddha could change somebody like that, or like the story of when the assassin was sent to kill Ajahn Chah. So our own teacher's teacher, the Thai monk Ajahn Chah, were part of this Ajahn Chah lineage. He was taking away a lot of, because people had developed a lot of confidence and faith in Ajahn Chah, they wouldn't go and support the other temples in the area as much. And so some of the other city temples in the region were losing their support, and people were going to be students of Ajahn Chah instead. And we don't know exactly who hired the assassin, but there was an assassin hired to kill Ajahn Chah. And he was hired to go into the monastery and see what his daily schedule is. When does he leave his dwelling place? When does he go on his alms round collecting food? When does he do various things throughout the day? And this assassin was just living as a guest in the monastery and posing as a guest in the monastery, and ended up listening to a couple of teachings from Ajahn Chah and developed confidence in Ajahn Chah, developed faith in Ajahn Chah, and thought, what am I doing? This is crazy. And he went and gave back the contract and returned to the monastery and asked for ordination. And he was ordained by Ajahn Chah. And he never disrobed. He died in the robes. He died as a monk. So I find that very, very powerful.
Did he tell Ajahn Chah that he was going to...
Later on, yeah. Later on, yeah. Yeah, he made it known later on. Yeah. Yeah, and he was kind of accident prone. Also, he kept getting injured in various ways, but that may have been his karma from killing people before. But he made a turnaround. He made a turn for the better in the end. So it can happen. Bad people can turn to be good people, but it's not that common. It takes kind of a certain angle on things. There's also the story of a Western monk living in Thailand, and he's quite well known and a very eloquent Dhamma teacher, a very great Dhamma teacher, and he gave a public Dhamma talk in Thailand one time, and a lot of people attended it, and one of the people who overheard the talk was a Thai mafia boss. And the Thai mafia, they're known for like incredible brutality and incredibly ruthless. And this particular mafia boss was so inspired by the teaching that he went and took the 5 precepts and vowed to not kill anymore. And he went back to his gang and said, "Okay, guys, we're going to be doing things differently now." And they were kind of like, thought he had gone crazy. Like, what's this guy talking about? And so, yeah, he actually turned his life around. He ended up dying a couple years after that. He was murdered by a rival mafia, but he actually cultivated goodness in the end. So these people can make a turnaround. It is possible.